During my review of the near-death experience video by No Nonsense Spirituality, the host of the video, Britt, brought up some very interesting and certainly very important claims about Dr. Eben Alexander's case, which, if true, would certainly bring up a lot of questions for me about that particular case. Having had Dr. Alexander on the channel before for the podcast, and having worked with him during my work with IANS, I thought it'd be a good idea to invite him back to the channel to discuss some of these claims, and to help determine exactly what relevance they may have on his experience. So in this short series of chats with Dr. Alexander, we will first give a brief recount of his experience, and then continue on with his thoughts on the claims from the No Nonsense Spirituality video. We will also touch upon the current science of near-death experiences, consciousness, and survival after death.
I spent the first 54 years of my life honing a very scientific worldview, and that was based in materialism or physicalism, the notion that only the physical world exists. And so that's why I was especially shocked when November 10th, 2008, I had severe back pain, severe headache, then grand mal seizures, lapsed into coma, was in coma for a week due to what turned out to be a severe case of bacterial meningoencephalitis. It's the worst kind of bacterial meningitis one could have. Very commonly fatal, leaves people wrecked. In fact, that's one of the biggest things about my story is when people read the medical details, especially the medical case report that was published in 2018 by 3 doctors not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery. They'll realize that this was not just a simple case of meningitis. This was an absolutely should have killed me case of meningitis. And in fact, the data is all there in the medical record as put out in this case report in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, September 2018, that my brain was in no shape to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination, much less this profound kind of robust, transformational, detailed set of experiences that I did encounter. And to me, that was a huge mystery very early on, as soon as some of my neuroscience knowledge was returning to me, because everything was deleted for my NDE. I had an amnesia. It's very unusual for NDEs, but it was critical for my understanding the reality of it all. But at any rate, I went through these multiple spiritual levels that I describe in the books Proof of Heaven and also in Living in a Mindful Universe, and ended up having a beautiful guardian angel on a butterfly wing. I mean, there's a lot of kind of spiritual beauty to the story, but I just shared, the experiences I remembered it. Went through these multiple levels of ascending into first what I call the Gateway Valley, up from an earthworm's eye view, a very primitive kind of course starting point. The Gateway Valley is where I encountered that beautiful spiritual guide and so many of the spiritual features of the journey. But important to point out, people often talk about a boundary in near-death experiences, and they either are to go beyond that boundary and never come back or not. And I think I got to glimpse beyond the boundary with my experience with the core. The core was an infinite inky blackness, but filled to overflowing with that divine love of that creative source, that God force that is so influential to near-death experiencers, no matter what their prior religious beliefs, many of whom might have even been atheist or agnostic. And yet more than 90% of NDEers come back knowing in the reality of a loving God force at the core of the universe. And again, as I often say, it doesn't matter if you want to try and label that as God or Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, Tao, all the many names we have for it, because in fact, we're all really talking about the same thing. And so anyway, I would get up to that core realm, and even though I couldn't have an Eben Alexander life review because of my amnesia, I could certainly see life reviews and reincarnation written very powerfully in these 2 visions I had in the core realm. One I call the Indra's Net vision, and the other one, a more primitive and earlier vision, was the Flying Fish vision. But they are what really clued me into this reality of eternity of soul, and how the only thing that's really important are our relationships and how we interact with our fellow beings. And that's what really gives the material for that life review. And the interesting thing, if you study life reviews scientifically, for example, Bruce Grayson published on almost 700 life reviews in over 1,000 NDE cases. And he points out that a third of them, of these life reviews, involve the entire life. And you might wonder, how can that be, during a 10-minute cardiac arrest? I think the main point is that that realm is a realm of eternity. We're no longer slave to earth time when we're purely in that realm. At any rate, all of this was very kind of an amazing journey to go through. It seemed way too real to be real. That's actually how I described it to my older son, Eben IV, who was majoring in neuroscience in college at the time. When he got home for Thanksgiving break, 2 days after I got out of the hospital back in 2008. And I told him it was way too real to be real. I mean, my neurosurgical knowledge was not back yet. My doctors, I tried to tell them about my spiritual experience, and they would just pat me on the back and say, well, your brain was soaking in pus. We have no idea how you're even coming back to us, but you can forget about it because the dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. So that was the message I got from my doctors. So I thought, wow, it was all a hallucination. Fantastic, amazing. But it was so ultra real, I figured it was going to give us some clue about consciousness if I could get all the parameters of my meningitis and everything else together. And that's why I was so busy recording the phenomenal experience. And my older son also advised me to do that before I read anybody else's near-death experience. And I think that was very important thing, because I wrote around 20,000 words before I dove into the NDE literature. I'd never paid much attention to that literature before. Just like my doctors advised me, I thought, dying tricks of the brain, who cares? Or tricks of the dying brain, who cares? So, but now I'd had this experience, and you bet I was paying big attention to it, even though my original default position was that it had to be some kind of monstrously bizarre and ultra real hallucination. That was what my doctors told me it had to be. But then the more I was going back to the hospital over weeks and months, going through my medical records, looking at CT and MRI scans, all those neurologic exams, all the lab details, this wasn't lining up at all. The meningitis of the patient I was studying, my case, was far too ill. In fact, survival is a complete surprise. I mean, really a surprise. That's one of the problems people have if they don't have any medical education. They don't realize that medical case report in the September 2018 Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases by Surabhi Khanna, Lauren Moore, and Bruce Grayson goes light years towards making the case, not only that my brain was in no shape to harbor any dream or hallucination, but beyond that, how do you explain my recovery? I mean, that's something, the lay people really have no idea. They just say, oh, well, you had meningitis. Well, we know that's a bad brain infection, but so what? But people who know the medical details, especially when you review the details in my case, the Glasgow coma scales, anything below 9 is deep coma. I spent almost all of that week, 6 or 7, probably sometimes as low as a 5. A corpse only gets a 3, so 5's a mighty low score. And that's how I spent most of that week. My cerebrospinal fluid glucose level, which in you or me would be 80, in somebody with a severe bacterial meningitis might dip as low as 20. Well, my CSF glucose level was 1. Nobody in the consulting group up and down the eastern seaboard had ever heard of somebody that ill from gram-negative bacterial meningitis who then end up making a full recovery. And in fact, one of the biggest points, I think, in the kind of backstory of the publication of that case report is when the 3 doctors who wrote the case report were challenged, how do you explain this miraculous recovery? I mean, there's nothing obvious here. This appears to be a case that would lead to complete, destruction of somebody's mental capabilities or death. So why didn't that happen? And they said it's because he had a near-death experience. So in other words, anybody who's kind of challenging my story better come up with a ready explanation for how in the world I could go from horribly moribund and near death with a 2% chance of survival and no chance of recovery to making a full recovery over 2 months to where I was back more fully than I'd been before. Memories were more complete than before. I mean, there's so much about me that was more than before. And that all came from this deep dive and near death with E. coli bacterial meningoencephalitis. So I've spent the 17 years of my life since that coma working with scientists around the world. And certainly for your viewing audience, if they're not aware of it now, to um, the website bigelowinstitute.org. And bigelowinstitute.org has 29 essays that were written in 2021. They were all part of a contest by someone who had lost his wife. His son had committed suicide, Robert Bigelow. He wanted to know what's the scientific evidence that their soul is still around. And he received 29 essays, all from people who had to demonstrate at least 5 years of experience with the afterlife question. And those 29 essays at bigelowinstitute.org would go a long way towards providing all the scientific evidence we need, not only for the afterlife, but also reincarnation. Because that UVA-DOPS.org data from the University of Virginia, gathered over more than 6 decades, is very important. You know, all the evidence. They've studied something like 2,500 cases of past life memories in children. And of those cases, something like 1,700 have been solved. That is, they actually found the person who lived before. So, you know, you can say, well, I don't believe in reincarnation because I don't remember a past life. Well, none of us do, for the most part. In fact, the doctors who have done that work, Ian Stevenson, Jim Tucker, will tell you that you need to harvest these memories from children before age 5 or 6, because those memories get covered over by natural processes. So even the ones who have been heavily interviewed and written about, by the time they're in their teen years, they don't remember those past lives anymore. It's like most of us, but you can recover what appear to be past life memories through meditation, hypnotic regression, having another NDE or a shared death experience. These are all ways of kind of revealing it to us. But for me, it's been an incredible awakening, and especially important to me as a scientist to realize how much scientific evidence backs up everything that I claim in Proof of Heaven, Map of Heaven, and especially that third book, Living in a Mindful Universe.